Hello, my name is Eleanor, and I was kicked out of my own sister's bank for withdrawing $400 from my own account. They didn't see a woman, they saw a burden. My sister humiliated me in front of strangers, and my husband, he watched it unfold. Until he didn't, because when he showed up, in a Rolls Royce, their panic was louder than their pride. But that day wasn't about money, it was about erasure. What do you do when your own blood writes you out of the story and expects you to thank them for it? The sun was already high when I pulled into the parking lot of Sterling Heritage Bank in Scottsdale, Arizona. The late summer heat wrapped around everything like an unwelcome hug, dry, clinging, and relentless. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel for a second longer before I exhaled slowly and stepped out. I had only come for a simple errand, $400 to help cover my daughter's school supplies, nothing extravagant. Just enough to buy her new notebooks, a pair of shoes that didn't squeak, and maybe even a little lunchbox with her favorite cartoon. I adjusted my blouse, hoping I looked put together. Modest slacks, clean flats, a worn purse, nothing that screamed desperation, even though my balance barely held. I walked through the bank doors, the air conditioning hitting me like a blessing. Familiar, sterile, like the past didn't matter here. I hadn't stepped foot in this branch since the funeral. Approaching the teller, I smiled politely and handed over my ID and bank card. "Just a small withdrawal," I said, keeping my voice light. She glanced at the screen, then at me. Her expression didn't match my smile. "One moment," she said. Her fingers tapped something on the keyboard. Then again, then a pause. My stomach fluttered, not in fear yet, but in anticipation. Something wasn't right. "I need to get the branch manager," she added quietly, already standing. I watched her disappear down a hallway. The moments stretched, each second longer than the last. I looked around, the pristine floors, the ticking clock, a mother juggling her toddler near the ATM. Then she came. Vera. Hair pinned perfectly, sharp navy blazer, heels clicking like gunshots on marble tile. My sister walked toward me like a stranger at a job interview. No smile, no warmth, just protocol. Her eyes met mine, and in that gaze there was no recognition, not as kin, not as history, just paperwork. "Eleanor," she said, voice neutral. "Please, come with me." I followed her down the corridor, past the framed certificates, into a small glass office. She closed the door behind me with a soft click. The sound echoed in my ribs. "What's going on?" I asked, still trying to match her tone, still holding on to civility. She sat, didn't offer me a seat. "You no longer have access to this account." I blinked. "What?" "There was a change in authorization 6 months ago," she continued. "You were notified." "No, I wasn't. This is the joint account Dad set up before he passed. He wanted—" She cut me off. "He wanted a lot of things. What he didn't want was for you to keep leeching off the family." That word hit like ice water down my back. Leeching. I sat down, uninvited, because my knees felt unstable. "Vera, I'm not here to fight. It's $400 for my daughter." "And that's not this bank's concern," she said, folding her arms. "Or mine." I swallowed, hard. "I'm your sister." She tilted her head. "Not in this building." There was a silence. A long, thick silence that seemed to stretch decades. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Nothing would come out right. I stood up. "I'll just figure it out." "Security will walk you out," she said, already picking up her phone. As I turned, 2 uniformed men appeared like shadows from the hallway. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice robotic. I didn't argue. My feet moved, my heart didn't. I felt the stares, eyes glued to the scene unfolding. I could hear the judgment in their silence, see it in their tilted heads. A woman being escorted out, a purse slipping from her shoulder, papers fluttering like leaves in the breeze. One receipt rolled under the velvet rope divider. No one bent down to help. Outside, the heat slapped me harder than it had earlier. My blouse clung to my back. I dropped to my knees beside the car, scooping up the last paper that hadn't blown away. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys. Vera, cold, precise, unforgiving. I used to braid her hair when we were little. She'd complain I pulled too hard. I'd whisper stories to distract her, make-believe tales of queens and dragons. She'd listen, sometimes even smile. But that Vera was gone. I sat in the car and stared at the dashboard, the clock blinking 3:42 p.m. A memory came back uninvited. Dad's last birthday. I had stayed up all night crocheting him a scarf, matching the color of his army jacket. Vera had arrived with a Bluetooth speaker and a gift receipt from Nordstrom. Dad opened her gift first, smiled, said practical, and turned on the music. He never even unwrapped mine. Maybe that's when it started, the pattern of forgetting I was there. I reached for my phone to call Cassian, my husband, but paused. He was on a job site, busy, always busy. Instead, I stared at the locked debit card notification on the screen. Card declined. Account frozen. I whispered to myself, she erased me, like I was never part of her. I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath until the steering wheel beneath my hands started to blur. The sentence I whispered, she erased me, like I was never part of her, lingered in the quiet cabin of my car, like a ghost that refused to leave. I didn't drive off right away. I just sat there, motionless, letting the engine hum gently beneath me while the AC blew lukewarm air across my skin. It couldn't chase away the heat that had pooled inside my chest. My hands weren't trembling from rage. No, this wasn't fury. This was emptiness, a hollow drumbeat of realization echoing through me. Everything I had just experienced, being thrown out of a bank by my own sister, wasn't an isolated event. It was another verse in a long, bitter song that had been playing in the background of my life for years. Only now did I recognize the melody. My fingers reached down and adjusted the vents, as if that would make the air more breathable. It didn't. I leaned my head back, closed my eyes, and suddenly, I was 5 years in the past. We were all gathered around the kitchen table in Mom's house, just a few months after Dad had taken a turn for the worse. The air was thick with talk of treatments, hospice options, bills. Vera had a folder on the table and a tone in her voice that made it clear. Decisions were being made, and I wasn't part of them. "This is just a formality," she had said, handing me a pen. "Dad's care isn't cheap, and the house is the only real asset." I remember glancing at the paper. Waiver of inheritance rights. I didn't fully understand it, but my mother was nodding quietly in the corner, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Vera's expression was unreadable, polished like always. I had asked, "Can I have time to read through?" "Eleanor," Vera had interrupted, folding her hands like a therapist about to give up on a patient. "You never contributed to this house. You didn't even live here for the last decade." "I was raising my family," I had mumbled. "And Dad was dying," she snapped back. "We all made sacrifices. You can sign, or you can walk. Either way, the paperwork's moving forward." I had signed. The pen felt heavier than it should have. The paper trembled slightly under my hand. I didn't cry then, but I remember the way Vera had smiled afterward, not kindly, but like a chess player watching a pawn fall exactly where she wanted. Back in the car, my fingers clenched tighter around the wheel. The memories were unraveling faster now, one after the other. The attorney's office, a sterile little room with mahogany bookshelves and a ticking wall clock that made every second feel like a judgment. The lawyer, a soft-spoken man in glasses, glanced at me once and I could see it in his eyes. Sympathy. But he didn't speak up, not with Vera in the room. She sat beside me like a statue, perfectly composed, perfectly dangerous. When I hesitated, she leaned in. "This isn't about you. It's about Dad." And when I finally signed, hands shaking, she stood up before I could even put the pen down. "We'll handle the rest." We, not us. It was always Vera and the rest of the family. I was just the footnote. Every family meeting, every group text, every major decision, I was either left out or informed afterward, like an afterthought. If something went wrong, it was, "Well, Eleanor's never been reliable." If something went right, Vera would say, "It's because we planned it without drama." And I had accepted it, for years. Maybe because I was too busy raising my daughter, or maybe because deep down, I thought that staying quiet made me noble. But silence wasn't grace, it was erasure. The worst part wasn't being excluded from the family house or even today's humiliation at the bank. The worst part came last Thanksgiving. I had flown in early, determined to reconnect, to be present. I even brought homemade pies, the kind Dad used to love. I wore the nice blouse Cassian bought me for our anniversary and put on real earrings for the first time in months. Vera had invited a few colleagues, she said. Just some coworkers from the firm, you don't mind? Of course I didn't. When she introduced everyone, she gestured toward me and said, "This is Eleanor, an old family friend." I froze. Not my sister, not our Eleanor. An old family friend. I smiled anyway, laughed when one of the colleagues asked how I knew Vera. "We go way back," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "Shared a lot of history." That night, while everyone was drinking wine and clapping at Vera's perfect centerpiece, I stood in the kitchen alone, scraping pie crust into the trash. She didn't just push me away, she rewrote the story so I had never been in it, and I let her, until now. Back in the present, the engine of my car was still running. My phone buzzed with a notification, something from the school reminding parents about the upcoming supply deadline. I stared at the screen, then tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I wasn't crying. I wasn't breaking down. I was burning. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My face was flushed, but my eyes were clear. "If I'm not your sister," I said aloud, voice steady now, "then you're not mine either." I slipped the car into drive. The tires rolled slowly out of the parking space, but inside me, something had finally slammed into motion. The engine roared, but not louder than the rage building inside me. The engine's roar thinned into a dull hum as I merged onto the long desert road, the kind that stretched endlessly beneath the white-hot sky of Scottsdale. My windows were rolled down, though the air that poured in wasn't relief. It was a furnace blast of mid-morning heat. Sweat clung to the curve of my wrist where the fabric of my blouse stuck like a reminder of discomfort I couldn't shake. I rubbed at it absently, trying to redirect my mind away from the humiliation still clawing at my chest. I had already circled the bank once, a coward's drive-by with my hands locked at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. My reflection in the rearview mirror had startled me. My face looked thinner, hollower than I remembered, as though shame itself had carved lines into me overnight. And yet, there had been a strange promise in that silent loop around the block. Something in the rhythm of the stoplight changing and the tires humming against pavement whispered, "You don't have to accept their version of who you are." The next morning, I stood rooted before the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I smoothed down my hair with palms that trembled slightly, then buttoned the blouse Cassian had once given me. My gaze slid to the dress laid out on the chair. It felt like a juvenile defense, dressing up like armor, but I needed something that said, "I matter. I am not disposable." Not just for myself, but for my daughter. For the hope that one day she would look at me and know I fought to keep my dignity intact. Sterling Heritage Bank loomed ahead, its glass facade mirroring the relentless Arizona sky. Inside, it was too bright, too polished, the kind of clean that made you feel dirty simply for walking in. I forced my breathing to steady as I stepped forward, ID card already in hand. The teller glanced at it, and I caught the flicker in her eyes. Recognition, yes, but also that cruel curiosity people carry when gossip has already walked in ahead of you. She excused herself with professional precision, vanishing toward the manager's office. In seconds, 2 security guards emerged. They were polite, yes, but immovable, bodies angled just enough to signal that this wasn't a request. "Ms. Elwood said you are not permitted to step inside this branch," one guard whispered, as if shielding me from the sting of his words. His glance slid toward Vera's office door. My throat constricted. "That's not fair!" The words came out barely louder than breath, but the silence that followed in the lobby was deafening. Leather chairs, polished tile floors, and the hush of onlookers, each stranger pretending not to watch while absolutely watching. I tried to explain, my wallet left in my daughter's backpack, the shared account with my father, the right I still had to stand here, but the guard's expression remained impassive. They guided me gently yet firmly to the door. My heart thudded so loudly it felt like the sound filled the entire lobby. Still, I didn't scream. I didn't demand justice. I simply walked out, my legs wooden and my dignity unraveling behind me. The Arizona sun assaulted me the second I stepped outside, hotter than an oven door flung open. The asphalt radiated through the thin soles of my flats, searing with every step. My purse slipped from my shoulder, the clasp snapping. Papers spilled onto the sidewalk in a slow, humiliating cascade. Receipts, bank slips, a bent photograph of Dad and Vera smiling arm in arm, even a snapped pencil, all of it scattering like brittle leaves in a drought. I dropped to my knees, scrambling to collect the pieces. Each slip of paper felt like proof of a life they believed I didn't deserve to claim. I was so focused that I didn't notice the man across the street until his shadow fell over me. He carried ribbons and bows on his head, perhaps from a delivery truck, perhaps from a store, and without a word, he held out a bottle of water. I accepted it with trembling hands. The cold plastic pressed against my forehead was almost unbearable in its tenderness. The cruelty I'd endured inside the bank was sharp, but this small kindness cut deeper. It reminded me that invisibility was not permanent, that maybe someone still saw me. I sat on the curb, knees drawn up, shoes scuffed and aching. My chest rose and fell unevenly as I tried to catch my breath. My phone flashed its warning, 12% battery. The signal bars dipped in and out, like they too were abandoning me. Above, the sky blazed a merciless blue. In that moment, I felt stripped bare, of dignity, of belonging, of the version of myself I had once thought unshakable. And yet, beneath the humiliation, beneath the shame, a quiet resolve burned steady, not rage, not yet, but a glimmer of steel, the memory of my father's laughter, the way he used to thank me for something as simple as pie, the way Cassian's hand had closed around mine on sleepless nights. These fragments sharpened inside me like glass, a reminder that I had been loved, that I still mattered. I wiped sweat from my brow, blouse clinging uncomfortably to my back. I thought about how others might see me, a middle-aged woman with hormone-tired skin, hunched on a curb, gathering scraps off the sidewalk. Did anyone pause to whisper, "That's Eleanor"? My name felt suspended in the air, waiting to be reclaimed. Slowly, I stood. The water bottle crinkled in my grip, crushed by fingers that no longer trembled quite so much. My ruined purse slid over one shoulder. I didn't turn back to re-enter the bank. They didn't need to see me now. What mattered was that I finally saw myself. The sun burned against my closed eyelids as I drew in a lungful of dusty desert air. When I opened them again, I fixed my gaze on the bank's towering glass pillars, the security guards standing at attention by the doors. My lips didn't move, but in my chest, I spoke it clear. This isn't over. I'm still here. My phone buzzed in my hand, thumb hovering over a contact I hadn't dared to call in over a year. Cassian. My thumb hovered above Cassian's contact, the glass of the windshield throwing streaks of sun across my lap like pale, dusty brush strokes. The screen glowed too brightly in the heat, my reflection ghosted faintly over his name. For a few long seconds, I simply stared, caught between the impulse to bury the phone in my bag and the urge to finally, after months of silence, reach for the one person who had once told me the truth without dressing it up in family obligation. I reminded myself firmly that I wasn't going to be undone. Not by Vera, not by Sterling Heritage Bank, not by the faces that had turned away when I asked to be seen. My pulse hammered in my throat. I drew in a shaky breath, exhaled, and pressed call. The ringtone filled the quiet car like a drumbeat, one ring, then another. The weight of each second pressed down harder than the Arizona sun overhead. Then, suddenly, his voice. "Eleanor?" It was calm, deeper than I remembered, threaded with a quiet urgency that asked 100 questions without speaking them aloud. The sound hit me squarely in the chest. For a moment, all the words I had rehearsed dried up on my tongue. I sank back against the driver's seat, eyes closing as though I could hide inside the timbre of his voice. "It's me," I managed, though my voice cracked, betraying every month of silence. "I need help." On the other end, there was no quick reply, only silence, but not the kind that dismissed, the kind that listened. I pictured him standing by a window, phone in hand, his day already spinning with work calls, meetings, strategy sessions. And yet, he was here, with me in this fragile moment. My fingers brushed the bracelet circling my wrist, the one Dad had given me years ago. Smooth metal warmed by my skin, engraved in his handwriting. Eleanor Beckley. My name, his name for me when I was little, when my place in the world wasn't a matter of debate. The memory of his voice reading it aloud burned into me. It almost undid me. Tears threatened, but I held them back, clutching the bracelet as if it could tether me to strength. "Stay there," Cassian said finally, his tone quiet but decisive. And so I stayed. The car sat idle on the side of the road, windows cracked just enough to let in the scent of asphalt and the faint citrus drifting from trees, somewhere beyond the stretch of strip malls and desert dust. The heat had been building all morning, pressing down like a second skin, but the call felt like something shifting, like a current beginning to turn. I leaned my head against the seat, closed my eyes for a few seconds, and remembered the last time I heard his voice without intermediaries. After Thanksgiving, after the arguments that never truly ended, he had told me, "You don't owe them silence." Back then, I hadn't believed him. I thought silence was sacrifice. I thought peace was earned by absorbing every insult, every erasure, every accusation that I had taken too much. But today, stripped bare outside that bank, I realized peace wasn't silence. It was truth. Even when spoken with lips that trembled, even when it came out in a voice so raw it barely sounded like mine. The sunlight shifted through the windshield, dancing across my cheek and igniting old memories I hadn't invited. Vera's sharp face, triumphant as she accused me of stealing more than my share. My mother's subtle nod, her quiet alignment with Vera's story. The family's chorus of expectations drowning out my defense. Each insult had felt like a blade peeling another layer of skin, exposing nerves that never healed. I checked the time. Nearly noon. My throat was dry, mouth parched from heat and humiliation. My purse rested on the passenger seat like a bundle of fragile evidence. Dad's photo tucked among the paperwork, my daughter's crayon drawing of our family folded beside a stack of receipts. I glanced at it and felt my spine straighten. That little drawing wasn't just paper. It was the reminder of why I couldn't vanish into silence. It was who I was fighting for, who I had to become. A low engine sound stirred me from thought. Not loud, refined, measured. I turned my head and saw it. A Rolls Royce gliding into view, polished black, windows tinted dark enough to mirror the sky. It pulled up with a grace that didn't demand attention, but commanded it nonetheless. The door opened with the soft certainty of wealth, of presence, of someone who never had to knock twice to be heard. And then, Cassian. He stepped out, jacket sharp, walk steady, his entire presence radiating authority and calm. No rush, no show. Just controlled power. My first instinct was to duck, to make myself smaller, to hide my messy, sweat-stained blouse and scuffed flats. But something in me held firm. I stayed rooted where I was, the lane beneath my feet grounding me in a way marble floors and leather chairs never could. He approached with quiet steps, each one measured, until he stood before me. No dramatic gestures, no apology, just his presence, steady as stone. "Eleanor," he said, voice gentler than the air around us, but firm enough to steady me. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was recognition. Recognition of being seen, of someone stepping forward when everyone else turned away. His hand lifted slightly, then lowered, as if he wanted to touch my arm, but knew I wasn't ready. His words came instead. "Let's fix this." The sound of them struck me like thunder, rolling through the heat-hushed street. Fix this. The phrase expanded in my chest, too big to hold. I didn't know what it meant. Lawyers, exposure, confrontation in the very lobby that had cast me out, or something quieter, something more strategic. But I knew one thing. It wasn't pity. It wasn't dismissal. It was movement. Mobilization. My lips parted. My nod was small, but it carried every ounce of resolve left in me. "Okay," I whispered. In that moment, I wasn't erased. I wasn't disposable. The Eleanor who had sat on the curb, collecting scraps of her life in the Arizona heat, hadn't disappeared. She was still here. But alongside her, something new began to spark. A current electric enough to light a way forward. I felt seen. And for the first time in far too long, I felt hopeful. "Let's fix this," he said. Cassian's voice hung in the air long after I switched off the ignition, though I let the engine idle a moment longer, feeling the hum vibrate through the steering column into my palms. The leather seat beneath me was hot, molded by the sun, and the afternoon light angled sharp through the windshield. My heartbeat pulsed so loudly in my ears I could almost believe the car was still roaring. Inside the Rolls Royce, silence wasn't awkward. It was deliberate. A statement. Cassian didn't need to fill space with words. His presence alone carried weight. He drove with the ease of someone who never doubted the road would clear for him. I sat beside him, spine straight, palms pressed flat on my lap, reminding myself with every breath, I matter, even if I had to repeat it like a mantra to keep my courage upright. The tinted windows softened the outside world into muted gold. I watched Scottsdale blur past, citrus trees swaying, traffic lights blinking red to green, people moving quickly, like hurried ants, unaware that someone else's world had just cracked open. The hum of the AC filled the space between us. Sweat dampened the blouse beneath my arms, but I didn't slouch. My posture was an act of defiance. When we pulled up to Sterling Heritage Bank, the same glass facade that had reflected my shame earlier now mirrored the polished gloss of Cassian's car. Even before the engine stilled, I could feel the atmosphere shift inside. Employees by the window glanced over. The receptionist straightened, eyebrows arched. Behind the doors, Vera appeared, her outline sharp in the glass, lips poised in a half-smile. But the moment her gaze landed on us, the curve vanished. Her posture stiffened, her composure visibly strained. Cassian stepped out first, the car door closing with a soft, final click. His stride was unhurried, deliberate, carrying the kind of confidence that didn't need to shout. I followed a step behind, my flats clicking against polished stone, my own footsteps sinking to his like a second heartbeat. The doors opened for us. A hush spread across the lobby, voices thinning into silence. Heads turned, smartphones lifted discreetly, the glint of glass catching the light. I caught the whisper ripple through the room. What is he doing with her? Cassian didn't acknowledge it. He strode toward the assistant manager's desk, withdrew his platinum card, and set it down like a declaration. Heavy. Cold. Final. I want every joint account closed, he said, his voice level and cutting. Freeze every portfolio that names Vera Elwood. The room stilled. Staff shifted nervously, exchanging pointed glances. The words were soft, yet they carried the sharpness of glass underfoot. The air in the lobby thickened, like the charged pause before a desert thunderstorm. Vera swept forward from behind her assistant, her stride quick, her smile sharpened into something brittle. Her voice cut through the hush. "This is absurd," she snapped, higher than usual but not trembling. "You can't. You don't." Cassian didn't look at her. He didn't need to, but I did. "I warned you," I said softly, though my voice carried farther than I expected. My fingers tightened around the strap of my purse. "You don't get to erase me without consequences." A gasp echoed from somewhere in the lobby. A phone buzzed against a countertop. People leaned closer, forming a quiet audience. Vera's face flushed, half fury, half disbelief. The cracks in her composure showed, and for the first time in years, she looked less untouchable. Cassian signed the paperwork the staff slid across the counter. His hand moved steadily, no flourish, just precise strokes of ink binding decisions into permanence. Authority flowed from him the way heat rose from the asphalt outside. Inevitable, undeniable. I watched his hand and realized this was a kind of inheritance too. Not wealth, not titles, but the power of someone who believed I deserved to stand beside him. Inside, my chest burned with restraint. I kept my shoulders square, my face neutral, though every nerve in me was alight with seething energy. For years I had swallowed silence, tried to convince myself dignity meant endurance. But now, standing in that lobby, with eyes fixed on me instead of sliding past, I understood. Dignity was demand. Sunlight poured through the glass walls, cutting across the floor in bright, merciless lines. Staff whispered. A woman near the entrance stared at me, as though she couldn't reconcile the version of me she thought she knew with the one standing steady at Cassian's side. Vera's shoes clicked furiously against the marble as she turned toward the exit. Her voice lifted, pitched sharp. "You'll answer for this!" Cassian didn't rush. He paused only long enough to glance in her direction, face unreadable. "You should get a lawyer," he said evenly. Her hand froze on the door handle. Her mask shattered for just a second, and then the door shut behind her with a hollow thud. The lobby exhaled. Phones lowered. The staff's murmurs grew, cautious but electric. Cassian turned back to the counter, collected the papers, and slipped them into a folder. Then he walked toward the exit without another word, and I followed, my pulse racing, my breath shallow. When the glass doors slid shut behind us, the heat outside felt different. Not softer, the desert sun still pressed relentlessly, but it no longer burned me with humiliation. Instead, it felt clarifying, like fire burning away what I no longer needed. I inhaled deeply, chest heavy but unbroken. I hadn't begged, I hadn't cried, I had stood. Some people would say this was petty, that money isn't everything. But this was never about the money. It was about respect, about being treated like my existence mattered, not like a shadow to be dismissed. Back inside the Rolls Royce, I settled into the leather seat. Cassian closed the door gently, then glanced at me. His expression wasn't triumphant, wasn't gloating. It was resolute, determined. The engine hummed as we pulled away, leaving behind the hushed lobby, the parted stairs. Vera's final glare burned into memory. But her power over me stayed behind too, reduced to echoes in a glass cage. I thought of my daughter, her school supply lists, her drawing of our family folded in my purse. I thought of Vera's smug voice at Thanksgiving, of the inheritance papers twisted to erase me, of every time I had bitten my tongue while my name was turned into silence. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, smaller in frame, maybe, tired, but inside, larger, fuller, changed. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I leaned closer to the mirror, whispering words no one else could hear. No more being invisible. And for the first time, I believed it. The night draped itself over Scottsdale like a velvet curtain, soft but suffocating. From outside, our house glowed warmly, golden squares of light cutting into the dark desert air. Yet inside those walls, I felt no peace. The dining room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of silverware against porcelain. Dinner had been simple, roasted vegetables, grilled chicken, but the silence between Cassian and me was heavier than any meal. He sat across from me, sleeves rolled halfway, glasses slipping down his nose, fatigue etched into his face. His profile in the lamplight looked sharp yet weary, a man carrying more weight than he admitted aloud. I moved food around on my plate, not really eating, my thoughts circling the memory of Vera's glare back at the bank. The whispers, the hush that had fallen across the lobby when Cassian's voice cut through, the way Vera's mask cracked before she fled. That scene replayed over and over, and with it came the certainty. This wasn't finished. Afterward, I cleared the plates, rinsed them in the sink, handed Cassian his coffee. He thanked me softly, without looking up, and I felt a strange pang. Gratitude spoken in his quiet tone felt more intimate than any embrace. I turned toward the stairs, ready to retreat to the solitude of our bedroom, when my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a notification. Social media. A short clip. My stomach lurched before I even opened it. There I was, caught on shaky video, walking out of the bank at Cassian's side. The caption was vague, speculative. The comments below were worse. Did she do something wrong? Always drama with that family. Typical, dragging personal issues into public. Each remark pricked like a thorn, small but unrelenting. I tapped the username, an acquaintance from church, someone who smiled to my face on Sundays. Another message blinked in from a former coworker. Saw the video, thought you were stronger than this. It wasn't overt cruelty, but it carried no kindness either. Just another echo of their doubts, another stone thrown from the sidelines. I closed the app with trembling fingers. The room swayed faintly around me until I steadied myself against the counter. Cassian appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his coffee mug in hand. His gaze was level, his voice low. "They'll attack you," he said. "You know that, right?" I met his eyes. My voice came steadier than I felt. I expected it. For a long beat, we said nothing more. But in my chest, something settled. I had built this moment. I had chosen not to be silent, and silence would not save me this time. Later, when the house had quieted and shadows stretched long across the floor, Cassian brought out the manila folder. It smelled faintly of dust and ink, the scent of things long hidden. He laid it on the coffee table between us, opened it, and revealed stacks of papers, emails, internal memos from bank audits, hand-scribbled notes in Vera's unmistakable handwriting. "She touched accounts she had no right to touch," Cassian murmured, scanning line after line. His finger traced the annotations, circling phrases that stung with implication. "We have proof." My heart hammered as I leaned closer. Memories resurfaced, unbidden. Clients whose voices I could still hear, confused, wounded, dismissed. I remembered Mrs. Morales, a widow who came to Vera for help opening a basic savings account. Vera had demanded unnecessary documents, then rejected her application entirely. Later, I overheard her remark that Mrs. Morales sounded uneducated. The cruelty of it sat heavy in my stomach even now. I saw the names of others, too. Small business owners whose accounts dwindled mysteriously after following Vera's advice. Women whose concerns had been brushed aside as emotional. The quiet retiree who insisted something was wrong but never got a call back. Their complaints buried in files, ignored by those who should have cared. I looked up at Cassian, meeting his eyes across the sea of paper. "We'll reach out to her," I said firmly. "Mrs. Morales. She deserves to be heard." He nodded once. That simple gesture carried agreement, resolve. Together we began to list names, clients, coworkers, neighbors, anyone who had seen or suffered under Vera's quiet abuses. The puzzle pieces scattered for years were finally being gathered into a picture that could no longer be denied. The next morning, the desert sun was merciless. I drove back toward Sterling Heritage, the car's AC cooling my skin even as nerves prickled beneath it. I clutched an envelope in my hand the entire drive, its contents simple yet powerful. When I entered the reception area, Vera's assistant looked up in surprise. I set the envelope down gently on her desk. "You'll want to open this in private," I said. My voice didn't waver. The assistant hesitated, her fingers hovering over the flap, then nodded slowly. Behind me, I heard Vera's sharp voice slice the air. "Eleanor, wait, this is insane!" But I didn't pause. I didn't turn. My heels carried me steadily toward the exit. Every step out of that office felt like defiance carved into the ground. This wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even retribution. It was truth, finally brought into the light. A refusal to let silence define me again. Inside the envelope was a name, a journalist known for exposing corruption and financial abuse. Beneath it, in Cassian's handwriting, a single note. "We haven't even started yet." Outside, I leaned against my car, letting the hot desert wind whip around me, carrying the scent of dust and exhaust. My chest rose and fell heavily, not with fear this time, but with readiness. I caught my reflection in the tinted car window, sweat clinging to my brow, hair mussed from the wind. I saw a woman carrying scars, yes, but also a woman who had chosen to fight back. And for the first time in years, I didn't look invisible. I looked undeniable. A post-it note stared back at me from the coffee table. "We haven't even started yet." Cassian had written it last night, his sharp pen strokes almost cutting through the paper. Morning light filtered through the blinds, striping my bedroom wall in pale gold. The note fluttered slightly in the air conditioning, a reminder that yesterday's rupture was only the beginning. Cassian was already gone, out making phone calls, his voice likely echoing across polished conference rooms and tight-lipped board meetings. I sat upright in bed, chest still pounding from the ripple we'd set loose. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was power. Unleashed. By mid-morning, my phone was buzzing non-stop. A local financial blog had published an exposé that spread faster than wildfire in the dry Arizona wind. The piece was thorough, frighteningly thorough. It outlined Vera's manipulations with clinical precision. Unauthorized account adjustments, red flag audits long buried, and the voices of clients who finally stepped out of the shadows. Screenshots lit up my notifications. She stole from so many. Finally, someone calls her out. About time the truth is out. Friends from college, acquaintances from church, even strangers forwarded the link to me with wide-eyed emojis or cautious, "Are you okay?" I had rewritten 100 versions of how today might go. None of them prepared me for the moment I walked back into Sterling Heritage Bank. I dressed with intention. The blouse Cassian had laid across the chair for me, the strand of pearls Dad gave me on my 21st birthday, sneakers instead of heels, because I didn't want to wobble, not even once. My reflection in the mirror was not glamorous, not polished like Vera's, but it was solid. I mattered. The bank lobby smelled of polished stone and freshly shampooed carpet. Employees lifted their heads as I entered. Their conversations cut short, like threads snipped mid-air. The receptionist glanced up, recognized me, and quickly looked away. And then I saw the journalists. Cameras, recording devices, phones balanced like miniature towers on tripods. A PR handler stood rigid near the front, clipboard pressed to her chest. Vera emerged from her office as though she were stepping onto a stage. Blazer pressed sharp, hair pulled back into its usual nod of authority, eyes flicking across the room to measure the temperature. For a moment, the crowd quieted. She raised a hand. Queen commanding silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice polished, calm, controlled. "There have been allegations, false, malicious, regarding my conduct. I categorically deny them." The air trembled in the pause that followed. Then, from the back, a voice sliced through the lobby. "You stole my mother's retirement!" The words cracked like a whip. Every head turned. A man, red-faced, fists clenched, his voice echoing louder than the marble chamber should allow. For the first time, Vera faltered. Just a flicker, her jaw stiff, her eyes widening. She quickly masked it. "That claim is unverified," she said, chin lifting. "I will respond through the proper channels." But the reporters smelled blood. "Is Mrs. Morales' case relevant here?" one shouted, thrusting forward a notepad. Another held up files, highlighted lines, photocopied statements. "What about these audits? These names? Did you alter client accounts without authorization?" Flashes popped, light bouncing off glass and metal. The questions came like blows, one after the other. Vera's posture stiffened, then shifted, her shoulders rising as though she could shield herself from the barrage. But her hands trembled, just slightly, in front of the cameras. Then it happened. Someone pressed play on a recording, a voice memo, clear as daylight. Vera's voice, sharp and unmistakable. "You'll lose everything if you go public." The words rang out in the lobby, bouncing off polished stone, searing into every phone and every microphone present. The room froze. Vera's lips parted, her face drained of color. "That was taken out of context," she stammered, but her voice cracked. She tried again, louder. "It was misconstrued." But the tears prickling in her eyes betrayed her. The lobby erupted, journalists surging forward, clients shouting, cameras flashing in relentless rhythm. The PR handler tried to corral the storm, but the moment had already shifted. The Queen's crown had slipped, and everyone saw it. I didn't cheer. I couldn't. I stood in the crowd, heart pounding, but not with triumph. What I felt was heavier, thicker, justice pressing down like a stone. Real, undeniable, but soft at the edges. A release. Across the glass wall, I saw them. Neighbors, strangers, clients lining the sidewalk, newspapers open to the fresh headline, phones lifted to capture every frame. And I wondered how many of them whispered under their breath, "I see you now." When the chaos swelled too loud, I slipped quietly out the side door. The desert heat hit me like a wave. Across the street, a coffee shop beckoned. I ordered a latte, found a table by the window. My reflection in the glass looked older, more worn, but also steadier, stronger. I sipped, fingers curled around the warm ceramic, watching Vera's silhouette across the street as she faced the firestorm. She still spoke, still tried to explain, deny, survive. Defeated, yes, but not destroyed. And then my phone buzzed. A single message. Please, meet me. One last time. I froze, thumb hovering above the glowing screen. My chest tightened. I could almost hear the hum of the bank lobby still in my ears, Vera's voice echoing, the recording replaying like a wound that couldn't close. My thumb hesitated. I whispered to myself, low and certain, "Tell me where." The reply came quickly. 2 p.m., St. Mary's Courtyard. Just reading those words made my chest tighten. I hadn't stepped foot on church grounds in years, not since Dad's funeral. The thought of that place, of the wooden bench where he used to hand us melting cones after service, brought back a blur of Sunday shoes and sun-faded hymns. I arrived early. The Arizona sun wasn't kind that day. Its heat bounced off the pavement, but the courtyard held a quiet hush under the shade of old oak trees. I sat at the edge of the fountain for a while, listening to the water gurgle, a soft, familiar rhythm from childhood. Then I saw her. Vera sat slouched on the bench. Sunglasses obscured her eyes, but nothing could hide her posture, defeated, hunched like the wind had knocked something permanent out of her. I walked slowly, my sandals crunching gravel, until I stood in front of her. She didn't stand, just looked up and offered a single word. "Hi." I said nothing. I sat down beside her, not too close, just enough. After a pause, she began, I didn't mean for things to go this far." My jaw clenched, but I kept still. "I was wrong," she added, the words tumbling out like pebbles, small, soft, and without weight. "I never should have done what I did. I let it spiral. And I know it hurt you." I shook my head slowly. "No, Vera. You're not sorry. You're scared." Her shoulders twitched. Silence held us for a moment. Then, so quietly I almost didn't catch it, she admitted, "Yes, I am." I turned to look at her fully for the first time. "You should be." Her lips tightened. The tremble in her hand was slight, but visible. "You know," I continued, voice low, "it was never about the $400. She said nothing. "It was about how quickly you erased me. How easily you turned me into a stranger the second it suited your image." Vera looked down. "You always made me feel small," she whispered. I blinked. "That's not my problem anymore." From my purse, I pulled out a check, $400 made out to me, signed in Cassian's exacting penmanship. I held it for a moment between us. "This," I said, "is the number that started a war." She eyed it. I tore it in half, then in quarters. Let the pieces fall onto the dusty ground between us. "You don't owe me, and I don't owe you anything either. We're done pretending we're anything other than two people with the same parents." She turned her face away. I stood slowly, brushing off my skirt. "I'm leaving, Vera. Arizona. The house, the job, the entire memory of trying to make us work. I've spent years patching up a family that never existed." She stood too. "Can't we try again?" Her voice cracked. "Start over?" I tilted my head. "Start what, exactly? Another chapter of make-believe?" She didn't answer. Her hands fell limply at her sides. The heat thickened, clinging to the moment like dust to sweat. I stepped back, then paused. "I hope you find peace," I said gently, "but not through me." And I walked away from the bench, from Vera, from the warped version of sisterhood we'd worn like a mask too long. The words had barely left my lips, but they echoed in me for days after I walked away from Vera on that bench. "I hope you find peace, Vera. But not through me." There was no dramatic music playing, no cinematic lighting, just dry wind, rustling trees, and the steady beat of my own heart finally slowing to a natural rhythm. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was release. A month passed, and with it, a whole other version of my life quietly fell into place. I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, not for any romantic reason or dramatic escape, just because I'd once passed through on a road trip and remembered the way the adobe buildings glowed at sunset. It felt like a place that didn't demand anything from me. a small crafts shop on Canyon Road, Adobe Hands, hired me as a creative consultant. My mornings were now filled with fabric swatches, ceramic displays, and gentle conversations with tourists about Navajo pottery or recycled glass wind chimes. I walked to work every day. The path curved through a quiet neighborhood filled with lavender bushes and the occasional curious lizard sunbathing on a rock. No traffic. No confrontation. No guilt. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for a phone call, an accusation, a new storm to roll in. But nothing came, just a slow, warm rhythm that began to feel like peace. And then the article hit my inbox, an update from one of the financial watchdog blogs I had followed for years. Vera Elwood, former Sterling Heritage manager, no longer with the bank following allegations. It was brief, no lawsuits, no public statements, just a sentence confirming what I already knew. She was done. Later that week, a friend from Phoenix texted me. "Swear I just saw your sister bagging groceries at a Whole Foods off Glendale. Sunglasses, hat, trying to look invisible." I stared at that message for a long while, and I felt nothing. No joy, no vengeance, just a quiet acknowledgement. Actions, finally, had consequences. That night, I found a letter tucked into a box I hadn't unpacked. The envelope was addressed to my father. My handwriting from years ago, never mailed. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, and read it by lamplight. "Dad, I'm trying. I really am. To hold the family together, to be the good daughter, to not make noise, but it's breaking me in places I don't know how to name. And I think, maybe this family was never whole to begin with. Maybe we were just surviving each other." I folded the letter, not to seal it, but to set it free. I didn't need to send it anymore. He'd already heard it, somewhere in the quiet corners of my heart that he helped build. A few days later, another letter arrived, this one handwritten and trembling with age. It was from Margaret, the widow Vera had once manipulated into an unfair investment scheme. "Dear Eleanor," it began, "no one ever believed me. For years, I thought I was just old and confused, but then you called. You listened. You believed me. You saved my dignity. Thank you for seeing me." I cried. Not the bitter tears I'd grown used to, but a softer kind, the kind that makes room, the kind that cleans something out of you. That weekend, I visited the sculpture garden just outside town. It wasn't large, just a few stone paths between bronze and wood installations. But one piece caught me. A weathered plaque sat beneath a narrow steel doorway, no wider than a child's closet. It read, "Forgiveness is a door you open for yourself." I stood there for a long time, not stepping through it, just touching the frame. That was enough. I smiled, not for Vera or Cassian or even Dad, but for me, for the woman who had finally stopped waiting for permission to begin again. I was the girl they erased. But now, I'm writing the rest of my story, in ink they can't wash away. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people who were supposed to protect us. But healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it's the courage to walk away without looking back. Have you ever had to cut ties with someone in your own family to protect your peace?